Welcome in to the Go 24/7 podcast, Fall Camp Report Edition number 2. We have my name is Bryce Koon alongside Glen West. And Glen, we are just 17 days away from LSU kicking off against USC in Las Vegas. We joked to end the pod last time that we would hope you would be able to make it to the game. If not, we'll just know that you made a lot of money and you're going to share it with the entire site at one of the great casinos out there in Las Vegas. But we're 17 days away. Cannot wait for that game. It's going to be a lot of fun. But until then, Glenn, we've been able to watch fall practice. It's been an interesting week, a hot week. I don't mind that Brian Kelly gave us the day off. The players can go 4 or 5 straight days. For us getting the day off today would have been day number 4 in the row we've been out there. But man, it's been a fun week. It's been a competitive week of fall camp here in week number 2, which Brian Kelly kind of talked about. It's moving day.
Yeah, it's moving day. We got 3 straight practices, 3 straight days in a row where we got a little bit over an hour to watch the team, and kind of coming into this week. I mean, even when we spoke with Blake Baker back on Saturday, he had talked about how important this week was going to be, especially for the defense, in just terms of just the competition, the battles that have been going on there, the first 7-8 practices. So now that we're into practice 11, we've got another viewing session here on Saturday in a couple days, where we'll get another good look at the team. But honestly, there hasn't been much change, I don't think, in terms of the rotation, in terms of kind of the look of what this defense is doing in terms of personnel. I think coming in, we all were anxious to see if there'd be any kind of substitution or rotation at cornerback. I personally haven't seen it. I think it's pretty much been Sage Ryan and Ashton Stans with the first team. I think J.K. Johnson, Jair Brown, P.J. Woodland have all rotated in at times, but that's been mainly a second team kind of unit. You look at the safety position. Jordan Gilbert and Jordan Allen are still pretty consistently back there with the first team. The star, it's pretty much been Major Burns getting all the first team reps. So I think there's been a little bit more continuity in terms of just personnel than I maybe expected. I thought maybe they might try some different things. Maybe they're doing that today and we're just not being able to see it. Maybe they'll do it tomorrow. Maybe it'll look a little bit different on Saturday when we walk in. But at least through 3 days here, that or at least the 3 days that we got to see, not much changing in the secondary. Up front with the defensive tackles, Jacoby and Guillory still with the first team. He's rotating in, Gio Paez and Jalen Lee are both kind of in that first team mix at defensive tackle. But I have a feeling that LSU is going to be playing a lot of those guys anyway, like even the ones that aren't really running with the ones right now. Dominic McKinley, Sean Washington, even some of the younger guys, JVR Suggs, I think all those guys are going to find their way to the field this year, because I think it's got to be a by committee kind of group up front with the D tackles. So, I would say probably if there was a overarching takeaway from these first 3 days of this week, it's probably been that there hasn't been much change in terms of the personnel. Now, they have been ramping up the competition. It's been a very competitive couple weeks. We got to see a 2-minute drill with the offense and defense in 11-on-11s. We got to see some red zone work between the offense and the defense in 11-on-11 situations. So, and there were wins on both sides. Like the offense, had a couple of nice drives. The defense had a couple of nice stops. So there's been some good, some bad with both, but I think overall it's been very competitive, very aggressive and physical, and it's kind of what you're hoping to see as you reach the midway point of fall camp, right? I mean, there's a lot of competition going on right now, and I don't think these guys are letting the heat or the weather conditions get to them at all. They're still out there fighting and battling, and I think that's a positive sign as well.
Yeah, it's a positive sign. And one thing I wanted to get at this point with you is, as last year we saw the offense kind of just do what they wanted, against the defense, and became kind of apparent pretty early on, that this offense was going to be special. This year, the offense has made their fair share of plays. Kyron Lacey's looked good. Chris Hilton's looked good in spurts. C.J. Daniels, Caleb Jackson, Josh Williams, and Garrett Nussmeier has looked good to a certain extent. But Glenn, for as many battles as these two sides of the football have gone against each other in those 11-on-11 team periods, especially in the 11 on 11, I feel like for as many wins as the offense might get, the defense answers. They respond very well. And I think we talked about this in our last pod. We had a commenter on our board say, sounds a lot like last year. And I did, and you, I think you responded with, you want to caution. Like, I think this is different than last year. I think that the word that describes this fall camp from a defensive standpoint is they are more competitive. They seem more in unison about what they're doing. We've talked with Harold Perkins, we've talked with Ashton Stamps, we've talked with a plethora of defensive players, you know, about being on the same page, communication, and kind of an overall excitement about what Blake Baker's brought to this side of the football. Wanted to get your thoughts on this because I do think like you had the 115th, 110th ranked defense in the country last year. It's going to be better. Like I don't know how much better it's going to be, but I think one of the signs that I've taken away is that they're competitive. And I don't think it's an indictment on the offense because I still think this O line is one of the best in the country, probably the best in the SEC. I just think this defense is competing. They may have heard a little bit of the outside noise, and Bo Davis and this staff, I mean, the biggest thing was internal development, and we're starting to see this group gel together a little bit. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. It looks impressive though, and it is different than what we saw last year.
Yeah, I mean, competitive, in unison, that those are good words to describe just kind of what we're seeing out there. And, look, I think there is an element of this. You can only report what you see, right? And
Yeah.
like we don't know the nuances of what they're actually calling. And a lot of these 11 on 11 drills, we are a whole field away from seeing what they're actually. I mean, we get a good kind of overview look of the play, but we don't actually get to see, we're not right in there when they're calling the plays or anything like that. You don't really get to hear much from the sidelines or anything. So I will say, like, there are some drills there, especially when they go kind of, or at least, for example, the 2-minute drill that they did.
Yeah.
I believe it was on Monday. It was all pass. It was all pass. There was
Yes.
no run. And I think, you could make the devil's advocate argument that the defense probably knew there was going to be some pass in there. So like you can maybe defend against the team when you know what's coming in terms of the pass. And I think there is probably an element to that. But you still got to go out there and make the plays because they did the exact same thing last year and the offense still cooked them. So
Yeah.
you got to go out there and execute no matter what's being called, no matter if it's coming or not. You still got to move your feet. You still got to play defense. You still got to stay with your receiver. All those things are proving true so far. At times,
Yeah.
it's not. And I think the word that Blake Baker, that Brian Kelly, that a couple of these defensive players that we've talked to throughout the course of camp, the word they keep coming back to is consistency. It's consistency in the secondary, consistency in getting some pressure up front. I think probably what you're seeing in these 11 on 11 so far, at least in my view, the front seven is helping the back end immensely. Like the pressure that the defensive ends and tackles and linebackers like Harold Perkins and Greg Penn and Whit Weeks, the disruption they're causing up front, I think has really helped the secondary out. And I think that might be a storyline that we look at here, once the season gets started as, okay, well, who's going to be carrying this defense? We have thought for a while it would be the linebackers. I think now you're getting a little bit of a better sense that the defensive line can carry its weight, or at least compete a little bit more consistently. And if that's the case, and they can get some pressure and disrupt offenses and get in the backfield, make tackles for loss, force the quarterbacks into quicker throws than maybe they're planning on, then that helps the defense. It helps the secondary. It helps safeties and corners and guys like that. If consistency in coverage is going to be a concern for LSU going into the year, what's the best way to combat that? Get after the quarterback and make him rush throws. So like I do think that there are some positive signs and some positive trends. I mean, Savion Jones was a guy we talked about on the last pod. He's still creating some havoc. He's given Emory Jones everything he can handle. Emory Jones talked with the media on Tuesday, I believe, and basically told us like, y'all got to pay attention to Savion, man. He's actually given us some work. Like he's
Yeah.
been very competitive in these one-on-ones and certainly in these team periods as well. Jacobian Guillory, same story on the interior, getting some nice rushes. He's getting some nice bull rushes in there on the interior, helping clog up some lanes for those linebackers like Perkins and Penn to get into the backfield and make some plays. Like that's what you want to see out of Jacobian. You don't necessarily have to see him break into the backfield every single time on the interior, but you'd like to see him open up some holes for those linebackers to fit and to make some plays of their own. So I think that the front seven has really been working well together in terms of just what we've been able to see so far. I like what Harold Perkins has been able to do. It seems like every practice now he's getting a pass breakup or some kind of tackle for loss, or I believe he had one interception early in camp. I can't remember if that was him or not, but the linebackers are doing great. Greg Penn's doing a nice job as kind of your savvy veteran who's got a lot of experience under his belt. Kind of how they want to mix and match those four linebackers between Perkins, Penn, and the Weeks brothers is still something that I'm interested to see come game time, because it has pretty consistently been, Perkins and Penn, and then Weeks and Weeks, kind of first team, second team. So those third down packages come, bring Perkins off the edge, put Weeks next to Penn, and kind of mix and match from there. I think that's all stuff that LSU is exploring right now on defense. And look, we haven't even talked about the offense much, in terms of like their first couple weeks. I think we should probably get into them a little bit before this pod's out. But just from a defensive standpoint, I'm kind of with you in the boat of just more competitive. It's more. Their chemistry's good. Their energy's great. I mean, you look at Blake Baker on the sidelines, and he's doing push-ups and getting up in guys as soon as they make plays happen. I mean, it's a different feel from last year from that perspective for sure. Because I get that last year there probably wasn't a whole lot to be excited about when in terms of the defense constantly getting beat. But when the defense is making a play, everyone on that defense is happy for that player, and everyone on that defense is happy that that they're competing at a higher level this fall. So that those good vibes, that consistency element, that still needs to kind of improve, and we won't know that really until we get to USC in the first kind of month of the season and how that translates game to game. But at least from a competition and an energy standpoint, I've really liked what I've seen from this defense so far. But what about you? Are you kind of seeing a lot of the same things?
Yeah, I'd say it's see a lot of the same things. They've been competitive. They've won some battles. I think you're seeing a group that has a lot of growing up to do and maturing in terms of like young players in the secondary. We talked with Ashton Stamps. I mean, he was making his way, after he talked to us, and I just kind of asked him, I said, what's it like to be one of the veterans in the room now? Because in terms of playing experience and guys that have experience in an LSU uniform, he's kind of up there when you talk about corners that have actually played meaningful downs. So, I think it's a group, Glenn, that I'm not willing to put a number on what they can do, but I think this group's going to be better than last year. And LSU fans might say, well, of course, Bryce, it's hard to be much worse than you
It's
were
just how
last year.
much
But
better. Yeah.
it's just how much better. And I think that at the very least, we're going to see a group that communicates. We're going to see a group that knows where they're supposed to be and has a genuine understanding of the scheme they are running, and they feel comfortable in it. And now, look, you can have those things, and you might say, well, shouldn't they have that already? Last year they didn't. I mean, we were in week 10, week 11, and Greg Penn was telling us in post-game pressers, communication's still an issue.
Yeah.
If LSU has that, they can be at least an average defense, you believe. So that's kind of the baseline. I mean, I agree with a lot of things you said right there. It's exciting. And so obviously, like you mentioned, we got to talk a little bit of offense here, because for as much as the defense has kind of been like, a talking point since I feel like the bowl game ended, offensively, I'll just say this, Glenn. Kind of want to get your thoughts on Garrett Nussmeier, because we all just assumed, well, it's Nussmeier's the quarterback. There really isn't a quarterback battle in Baton Rouge this offseason. So it'll be Nuss. And yeah, there
There
might be a
isn't.
battle between Swan. It's we've all just said that, and it is, and there isn't a battle, but it's like, how has he been on a week to week basis? And I think that he has shown flashes of, you can really tell this offense is going to look different, flashes of excitement. And then I'll say this, and I'll throw it to you. Also, he's at times shown flashes of being that gunslinger tag that I don't think he loves, and he wants to kind of get rid of that. But it might be a part of his game that if he can do more good than bad with that moniker, LSU fans might not care.
Yeah, look, I think there's been some good things from Nuss, and some not so great things as well. Like, this has been a very kind of up and down fall camp as a whole. I'll say it's probably been mostly more up than down. I mean, like the one thing I'll say is I don't think that a lot of these throws that Nuss is making right now in fall camp. I think that it's more of just him trying to test what he can and can't get away with. And I know,
Yeah.
that's something we asked him about in player interviews earlier this week. How much of this is just kind of a learning curve for you, being able to, re-rep a lot of these mistakes that you're making. And he talked about like just not having the perfect camp actually being a good thing for him, in terms of learning experiences, and if he makes a mistake, knowing that he can go back and he can re-rep that mistake, he can figure out why he made that mistake, what the read was, why it didn't work, and then go back and find a better look. I think all that stuff is extremely important for a first time starter, because you are going to hit that wall in the season. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think there's anybody that expects Garrett Nussmeier to come out here and look like prime Joe Burrow in the first couple weeks of his career. Like, that's just not how it works. Even Joe Burrow was not Joe Burrow in 2018. Jaden Daniels was not Heisman Trophy Jaden Daniels in 2022, and he was a guy that started for 3 years at Arizona State. So, like, these first time starters at quarterback, they have to get into those game situations. They have to see all the different kinds of looks. They got to get used to the game speed. I know Nuss has had some experience in that department in terms of facing Georgia in the SEC championship and Wisconsin in the bowl game, but those are very those are good reps for him to have, but it's just not a big
Yeah.
enough sample size yet. And I think you need to get into the season here, before you really can start to judge what he's done. I do think he's made a lot of good throws. I mean, the chemistry that he has with Kyron Lacey and Chris Hilton and Mason Taylor. I would say to a slightly lesser extent, CJ Daniels. I know Daniels has probably been their third most consistent receiver. But there's been some days where Daniels has looked to go a little quiet. At least that's totally just in my view. There's been a couple of days there where maybe he hasn't been targeted as much. But and then I would say probably in that next grouping, you've got Xavier Thomas rising to the top. You've got Aaron Anderson, who I think has had a pretty solid camp overall. Shelton Sampson, Kyle Parker, all those guys maybe aren't getting the every down first team reps, but they're being worked in throughout
Yeah.
the course of these practices with the first team, because there's an understanding that LSU will need all of them to kind of get through the season here. And I think that plays into exactly what Nussmeier wants to be as a passer, what LSU wants this thing to be as an offense. They want to spread this thing out. They don't want to have to, go to Kyron Lacey 12, 13 times a game like they did last year with Malik Neighbors. I think they want to spread this thing around. They want to get a number of guys involved. They want to get Josh Williams and Caleb Jackson involved in the passing game. And so we've seen some good drives from Nuss in the offense. We've also seen the defense have their fair share of wins and create a couple turnovers, get a couple stops. I wasn't, the first team offense, I will say, did a very nice job in the red zone drill on Wednesday that we saw. I mean, it was Kyron Lacey 10-yard pass, Kyron Lacey touchdown, Garrett Nussmeier scramble. I mean, it was a kind of a smorgasbord of a lot of good offensive plays there in the red zone. And then when they kind of got into the goal line situation and they were, hammering the run, it was a little bit more difficult. The defense made a nice stand, and that final drill with down the goal line. But I do think that this, overall has been a pretty solid start for Nuss. But there have been some throws that I'm sure he wishes he could have back. And I think it's a good thing that he's making mistakes now. I mean, if you make
Yeah.
mistakes now, they're not going to kill you. You get to go back and you get to re-rep it. You get to study it. And it's a good thing, because I think it teaches also, that he's not going to be perfect in the games either, and he's going to have some mistakes that he has to overcome in the middle of a game. If he can kind of get those mental reps out of the way now as well, that'll only help him as he kind of goes into the first couple games of his career as a starter.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I mean, he's got to get comfortable. And look, I mean, this is LSU. Not every single fan's going to be patient with that process, and you don't really have time to work yourself in. I mean, you're not playing Nichols week one. You're not playing
Right.
South Alabama week one. It's USC. It's prime time. It's the only game on that night, and you're facing one of the best offensive minds, regardless of what you think about him as a head coach in the country, in Lincoln Riley, and a quarterback who also had a really, really good bowl game when they played Louisville back in January. So I will say this to your point. I've read a lot of this, and this is kind of where I sit with it. Like we talk about the Nussmeier reps and everything. Look, the Georgia game was what? That's almost 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things where it's like it makes a difference. The bowl game, that's the one, I feel like you can look at, but Nuss is going to have to carve out his own identity as an LSU quarterback and in the LSU quarterback lore. It's definitely hard. I mean, with the guys they've had for the past 5, 6 years, when you look at the names that have kind of littered the roster, but I'm excited to see what he does. I do think that there's a great chemistry. I think he's a different type of leader than Jaden Daniels, a little more vocal. We hear him barking out. I know we've seen him already, and I watched him the other day and into some of the one-on-ones. He throws a ball, his guy goes up and gets it. And before that guy even gets back the line of scrimmage, he's out there, shaking hands, congratulating them, and pumping them up. And so that's part of that competition aspect that it breeds success regardless. Like competition, free and open competition is always good for a program. And so I'm excited to see. I like the competitor that Nuss is. I'm excited to see him there, obviously, week one, because really, Glenn, I mean, we're going to do a full USC preview and write a bunch of stuff about it. But if you just kind of look at it, like there's no better opportunity for Nussmeier to stake his claim as not just quarterback one of LSU. He is, don't get me wrong, but as a dude in the SEC. He's kind of
Yeah.
been overlooked when you look at SEC quarterbacks, but and maybe for good reason, the tape's not out there, but you're facing what many people and maybe outside pundits will say is this is a potential shootout. We don't know about the defenses, but we know both sides should have really good offenses. And I mean, look, if you can go out to Las Vegas and put up 40, maybe 50 points, then I think a lot of LSU fans will be very excited about the 2024 season.
Yeah, I mean, and look, that's something that even last year's offense wasn't able to do. I mean, as great as
Yeah.
last year's offense was, they struggled in that first game against Florida State, and Florida State had a much better defense than probably this USC defense does this year. But you still want to go out there and make that that game one statement, right? And what
Yeah.
has been one of the overarching themes that we've had now for I would say probably over a month. It's been, man, do you have to get that first game? Like, do you have to get that
Yeah.
first game? It's been 5 years now since you won a first game. It's just such a demoralizing feeling to open up the season on a loss. We've talked to every single LSU player that we've gotten this year and asked him that question. And it's been, very consistently, we've got to get it. Like we cannot open this thing up on another loss if we want to be the team that we have expectations to be. And look, Nussmeier's play is going to be huge in that effort. I think the defensive lines play, the more that I get to see them, is going to be huge in that effort, in terms of just getting some pressure on Miller Moss and, trying to create some havoc there. We'll dive into more of USC when that game gets closer. But I just think that there's an opportunity there, like you mentioned, for Nuss to kind of stake his claim as, an up and coming quarterback in the conference and in the country. And he doesn't have the film yet. He doesn't have those reps yet. So if he's able to go out there and really put on a nice showing, get a bunch of guys involved, I think it'll put a lot of teams in the SEC on high alert that LSU's offense might not be last year's offense, but they'll still be pretty darn good and hard to top.
Yeah, and I think it'll also, for a lot of people, that week one game, like you said, we're going to take a long look at it, and we've already mentioned the importance of it, but it also could establish where I think a lot of people said, and maybe you and I in similar, and we're not going to get into this in this podcast, but LSU's a fringe playoff team right now. People kind of feel like maybe they make it in there. A big week one performance, you start to kind of think about maybe folks may want to slide them more comfortably into, a playoff contender, maybe not that fringe playoff team. So going to be a lot of great stuff that you can check out over at Go 24/7 about that as well. But Glenn, before we get out of here, I did want to ask you, we got a practice on Saturday coming up. Obviously, we only have a couple of more practices before we get to the real deal in game week. What are some things that maybe you want to see on Saturday? Obviously, it's going to be a longer viewing period. We're going to get to take in a lot of sights and sounds of practice, but just maybe one or two things that are important for you as you continue to form your opinion on this team.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of what we've kind of already talked about. I'd like to see if there's still that consistency with the secondary in terms of rotation and just kind of who they're relying on there, or if there's maybe a little bit of shakeup. I think
Yeah.
the reason they've cross-trained Sage Ryan at corner is because they've been waiting on Zy Alexander to get back to kind of his peak physical form. If you can start to see Zy, I mean, look, we've seen him the last couple days. I will say he looks a little better than he did right out of the gates of fall camp. But he still is still, at least in my opinion, still not moving all that great yet. If we get out there on Saturday and he's moving a lot better, I think that's a great sign for LSU. I'd like to continue to see how they implement, some of these young tight ends on offense. Kamorian Pimpton and Trey'Dez Green. I'll be interested to see if we get some more, kind of red zone goal line work that we get to view on Saturday. If that's going to be a part of what they install, and some of those younger tight ends that could be backing up Mason Taylor. I'd like to see Josh Williams in the running backs. I mean, like we got to get a good rotation here. I think one of the answers that kind of was interesting to me from BK on Wednesday. Somebody asked him, I think it was Cobble from WBRC, asked him about the running back situation and just do they think they have enough diversity there with the run game after kind of making such a big deal out of it for most of the offseason. And he said, like, I think that there's going to be some good rotations here, but there is going to be a guy on third down that LSU really kind of leans into. And to me, he's just screaming Josh Williams. I mean, like I really think that Josh Williams is going to be that guy on third down to start the season. From a passing perspective, from a blocking perspective, he's just the guy that you want out there. And that's not a new name. He was out there on third down a ton last year and certainly in 2022. I just think there's a comfortability there. But I would like to see if Caleb Jackson can maybe push him for some of those reps because, I think the best version of this team or the most explosive version of this offense is with Caleb Jackson on the field as much as possible. So if the sophomore can start to, carve out a deeper role, pass first and second down, I would be really excited to see if that's is something that kind of transpires here over the next, week or so. But what about you? Is there anything you're looking at in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we talked a lot about defense, but you kind of hinted at this that second group of receivers. LSU is going to run more than three receivers out there. I mean, that we've got on our depth chart over at Go 24/7. Xavier Thomas has been very, very impressive. I think I will say this, he is much more than a gadget guy. And I think when he came in the portal, maybe my inclination of was, okay, this is a guy that you can do some things with. A lot of people felt like it was a similar pickup to what they had in Aaron Anderson. I think we've seen that of Thomas. Like they're willing to throw the fade to him in the corner of the end zone. He's got a good jump ball. How does he progress? And then kind of outside of that, like Aaron Anderson's time is now. You got to get it done this year if you're going to carve out a role at LSU. He's played a lot of football, or we should say he's been in college for some time now, hasn't played a ton of football yet, but LSU has, a talented room around him. They've got talented young freshmen that I think they're excited about. And then obviously recruiting in the 2025 class that they're going to be excited about. So I think that receiver room as a whole, and you got to lump in where Glenn, I'm going to let it slide. I'll let you carry over your big prediction from last year, Kamorian Pimpton, and is going to make a big time play for LSU this year. Pimpton, Trey'Dez Green, and Mason Taylor. Look, man, the SEC's been ruled by the tight end by that program up in Athens for quite some time, and I really do believe that when you look at the potential that's in the room in Baton Rouge, that you can really start to see the makings of a very special room. Mason Taylor, I think, is poised for a big season, and that I'm excited to see because there's no chance. And look, Glenn, we're watching these. There's no way that these guys, barring injury or something like that, don't all see the field in some type of capacity in 2024. I mean, there's just too much talent in there. And if you're Joe Sloan, you're just licking your chops thinking about the red zone nightmares you can create, against teams. So I'm excited to see how that develops. We talk a lot about defense, but I like what you said about running back. And I'm kind of sitting with that wide receivers of who's the fourth, fifth, sixth guy that really starts to emerge when they go maybe five wide or, someone has to come off the field. They really say, okay, you're the next guy up. Like you mentioned, they're using a lot of different combinations. But look, hey, LSU fans wouldn't mind seeing Landon Ibieta out there maybe in a big time moment. Landon Ibieta has, I'll tell you this, for all the fanfare and the star power that's been in LSU's wide receiver room, Ibieta keeps on trucking along, and he is, if he proves to be some type of consistent guy that can be a possession receiver, Cortez Hankton and Brian Kelly will find some type of role for him at some point. But I'm excited to see how deep this receiver room can really be.
Yeah, I just remember watching Ibieta as a high schooler, kind of junior, senior year, in the kind of off-season circuits when he was with the Louisiana Bootleggers, which was a 7-on-7 team. He shared the field with a lot of college athletes on that team, and he was a standout. Like, he was a crisp
Yeah.
route runner. He was a guy that, I think LSU was really high on when they first got him in here. Unfortunately, he's just been hurt a little too much to kind of, I think, grow his game and develop it the way that he probably would have liked to. But yeah, that's a good point there. I mean, like, who are going to be those fourth, fifth, sixth receivers on this team, because they are going to throw it to more than just three guys this year. I think there's
Yeah.
going to be a very spread out offense this year. I think that's by design. It's kind of what plays into Nuss's strengths as a passer. And I will say this for Nuss, he's done a lot better job of knowing when to check down the ball, knowing when to go to the short and intermediate routes and have those guys turn up field. It's not just all deep balls from him. It's not all the 20 yards and up kind of
Yeah.
throws. He'll work those in, and that's kind of where he's gotten into a little bit of trouble. But for the most part, he's also been able to dump it down and let his guys go make plays on those short and intermediate routes. So
Yeah.
I will say, like, I do think that this offense is not close to reaching what it can be this year. I think that there's going to be a lot of intrigue around that first game. There's going to be a lot of intrigue here over the next couple weeks as we lead into the first game. So it's going to be a very exciting time to kind of watch how this team continues to grow over the next couple weeks.
Book it right now. We're recording this on Thursday, August 15th. Glen West is saying that Kamorian Pimpton will indeed make a big time play for LSU's offense. He might have said it last year, but like Glenn, you said at practice the other day, maybe a year too early, and we'll let
I was
that
maybe a
slide.
year early. I got caught up a little bit in the Pimpton hype last fall, but it's been up there this year too. I mean, like,
Yeah.
he's been the consistent second tight end out there with Mason Taylor, and if they're truly trying to work in two tight end sets like we've seen, and that's going to be a thing that carries into games, Pimpton's going to be the guy you're going to see out there. So we'll
Yeah.
see if Nuss
He's a
targets him.
monster. A monster, absolute monster. He is Glen West. My name is Bryce Koon. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below with any questions that you might be having about LSU fall camp. If you want more written content, head over to Go 24/7, the LSU arm of 24/7 Sports. We've got you covered, along with our recruiting guru, Sonny Ship. Great information, great board. Come over and hang out with us all fall. It's going to be a lot of fun. And man, we appreciate you, and we'll catch you next time here on the Go 24/7 podcast.